Welcome back to another episode of Pig and Whiskey Test Kitchen. Today we are cooking a Texas-style brisket. We're going to do something a little different. We're using black garlic. Stay tuned to see how it's done. We're going to go through the steps of how to make black garlic. If you're not interested in that and you prefer to buy your black garlic, please feel free to skip ahead to the 2.5 minute mark. We are starting with 3 cloves of regular garlic, and here we are just wrapping our cloves with cling wrap. That will help preserve the moisture during the cooking/fermentation process. Then wrap them each individually with a piece of foil. The foil will help regulate the heat in the garlic and will facilitate the Maillard reaction, which gives the garlic its color. We are going to cook the garlic slowly on the warm setting in our pressure cooker. Here we have a riser plate that will keep the garlic off the bottom of the cooker. We're going to turn it to warm and fast forward 2.5 to 3 weeks later. You will want to check at some point after the 2-week period, but it may need to go as long as 3 weeks. Okay, we're going to open this up, remove our garlic, being careful, it might still be kind of warm. Let those cool to the touch and then open each one individually, unwrapping it and setting your cloves to the side. And this is what it looks like. The dark color is from the Maillard reaction, much like a sear on the outside of a steak. The garlic will also take on a more complex umami flavor, but at the same time it will also reduce the pungency of the garlic and create a much more mild product. Now, we're just peeling all 3 cloves of garlic and placing them in our food processor. I'm adding about a 1/4 cup of beef stock to the garlic. Once you have that, go ahead and process that until it creates a fine paste. You may have to scrape down the sides of your processor a few times until you get the correct consistency. After you do that, scrape it into a bowl. And here we have our delicious looking black garlic paste. It is now the next morning and we are up before the crack of dawn. We're going to go ahead and fill our stick burner with charcoal. And once our chimney is lit, we're going to light the smoker. We are starting with charcoal today because we want to quickly build a large bed of coals in the smoker. We have our controller set to 250 degrees. So let's head inside to construct our rub for the brisket. First off, we're going to start with 1/2 cup of kosher salt. And then we have some freshly ground black pepper, approximately 1/4 cup. And we're going to add that to the salt and then stir to combine. A typical rub for a Texas-style brisket would be salt, pepper, and granulated garlic. But since we're using the black garlic paste, we're going to skip the granulated garlic in this rub. So let's go ahead and trim our brisket. Here we have a 15-pound prime brisket. And we're going to remove any large chunks of fat being very careful as we are using our Gunter Wilhelm carving knife, which is extremely sharp and somewhat unwieldy in inexperienced hands. So, just taking our time, being very careful to make precise, deliberate cuts, we're going to remove the membrane off the bottom, well, technically the top of the brisket. And we're also going to remove the decal from the side of the brisket. The decal is steamed and slightly cooked when it is removed from the carcass. So we want to make sure we go ahead and slice it off. Again, we are just slicing off more of the membrane because we want to maximize the penetration of the smoke into the brisket. We will be cooking this fat side up today, so we want to be able to have as much smoke as possible enter through the bottom of the brisket. In a competition trim, we would come along this line to separate the point from the flat. But since we are going to cook this as a whole packer, we're not going to remove the point. We are, however, going to remove large chunks of fat and expose the meat of the point so that we can get better smoke penetration. We are saving the fat and scraps for making sausage or adding to hamburger meat. We will grind them up in the next couple days and vacuum seal and freeze them for future use. No part goes to waste. Okay, here I'm just leveling out the flat of the brisket. I want it to be roughly even thickness all the way across the flat. I do want to leave some fat on there so it will protect the meat. Just go ahead and keep removing thin layers of fat until you get to your desired thickness, making sure to leave some fat. As I said before, it will create a nice bark and protect the brisket. Now we are just rounding off the edges. It'll help it cook a little more evenly and create a nice looking finished product. Here I am inspecting the grain of the brisket and I'm cutting a little notch so that when I'm done cooking, I know where to start my slices. Now take your black garlic paste and go ahead and rub that into the meat. We're going to rub that in and just pressing firmly, rub it until the meat is thoroughly covered. Using a good amount of pressure, try to force the garlic into the meat, but more or less we're just going to create a nice coat. Starting from the top side, we're going to coat it liberally with our salt and pepper mixture. Don't worry about the amount of salt you're using here, as the meat is a very thick cut and needs a lot of salt. Some of the salt will be removed during the cooking process, so it's very important to build up a nice thick layer. That thick layer will also aid in building your bark, as it will combine with the fat and create a nice, dark, crusty texture. Now that it is rubbed, we're going to place it on the top rack of our smoker. In this large of a smoker, there are several areas you can choose from. Today I am choosing to go with the top shelf, as the smoke will come from the bottom up and across the top of the meat, as this is a reverse flow style smoker, and the fat cap will protect the brisket as it cooks. We're going to throw in a log of post oak onto our coals. Then we're going to let our brisket go for approximately 4 hours. We're not going to wrap based on temperature or time. We're going to wrap based on color. I prefer my briskets around this color, as you can see in the video, but it tends to be around the 4-hour mark. Sometimes I let them go as long as 5 hours before wrapping, but if you prefer a darker bark, you can certainly let it go longer. Okay, we have some pink butcher paper, and we're going to place our brisket lengthwise on the paper towards one end. While I have this on the paper, let's take the opportunity to add a little more flavor to the brisket. Just like a seared steak that you pulled off the grill, adding a pat of butter to the top of it will benefit it greatly. We are using approximately half a stick of butter. I'm going to wrap it fairly tightly, folding in the sides and then folding it end over end. We don't want it to be a complete seal, but we definitely want it to be as tight as possible to hold in the liquids, but still allowing a little bit of airflow under the paper. Replace the brisket exactly in the same spot as before, and place your temperature probe as close to the middle of the flat as possible. Then let that go until it hits about the 200 mark. Then I'll want to start probing for doneness. It can go as high as 217 degrees, so we're going to probe for doneness every hour until it feels like room temperature butter. Never cook a brisket based on time or temperature. Once done, place it into a cooler and let it go for 2 hours. It was a little tight, so I didn't bother with venting the brisket. If it was overdone or close to it, I would have vented the brisket to rapidly begin the cooling process. But since it was a little tight, I just let it go. Here we have the notched end, which will indicate from which side we should begin slicing. Now, let's start slicing. The end is a little bit tight still, but as you get closer to the middle, you'll notice it'll be much more tender and juicy, which, quite frankly, is the best part of the brisket anyway. I just removed a little slice to do a little bend test followed by a pull test. You want it to bounce back a little bit but come apart easily. This is a nicely done brisket. Okay, we're going to keep slicing until we get into about the beginning of the point. We're going to check our slices again. Once again, a nice springy texture. But just take a quick look at this. I'm not going to squeeze the guts out of it as we want to preserve the moisture, but here's a nice view of some beautiful, juicy brisket. Alright, now that we're starting into the point, we're going to turn the brisket slightly and begin cutting in a direction that is more suitable for slicing the grain of the point. We're going to slice a little thicker, close to ½ an inch thick, as that's the way I prefer them. The flat slices make really good sandwiches, but these little point steaks I like to heat up in the morning for brisket and eggs. The umami flavor that comes from black garlic really elevates this traditional Texas-style brisket. The pepper and salt combine to form a bark that really complements the beefy flavors of the prime brisket. It is smoky, garlicky, and delicious. Thank you for joining us today in the Pig and Whiskey Test Kitchen. Hope to see you next time. And don't forget, subscribe.